As I come to air with you today, we have just learned of another attack, a horrific civilian attack. Russia has bombed, has attacked the Mariupol theater where civilians were trying to gain shelter. And it really shows how Russia has no boundaries in this and is willing to go to great lengths, including killing innocent civilians, children that are being murdered here. And I'll tell you this will become a defining point in history. The West is more united than ever. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Trish Regan Show. I am Trish. It's good to have you here today. A reminder that portions of today's program are brought to you by Legacy Precious Metals. There's never been a better time to invest in precious metals, clearly, than right now. Gold is something you do want in your portfolio. So give my friends a call at 1-866-589-0560, 1-866-589-0560, or visit legacypminvestments.com. That's legacypminvestments.com to learn about investing in gold today. I want to turn to the horror that's happening in the world and how this is actually putting the United States of America and the West in a far better position. Look, everybody's been worried about China, right? And I'm not discounting that in any way. But I think what we're seeing right now actually proves that the West will have the upper hand. You have a more united West than ever before. Look at all of these NATO countries coming together. Germany, which had been heavily criticized, understandably, by the previous administration for not paying, quote unquote, its fair share, which would have been 2% of GDP, now going over, above and beyond that 2%. One, I think there's a better leader there in charge, Angela Merkel, of course, being out, a better leader and leadership there in Germany. But Europe is realizing this guy is a threat and they need to be positioned accordingly. Ultimately, how does this wind up? He's going to China right now. Vladimir Putin is going to China looking for assistance, looking for military assistance. Well, if China's smart, they will go so far away from this. They will stay so far away from this. Why? Because he's not sane. He's not settled. And the more this becomes a problem and China gets dragged into it, the more it loses its way economically. President Xi has put in a lot of economic reforms that have given the state more power in China. He has increasingly gotten away from the capitalist fundamentals that have allowed China to be the success it has been over the course of the last decade. The minute you veer away from that, and I would argue, by the way, that China's never been fully capitalist, right? Because you can't have real capitalism and real freedom without having a democracy. But nonetheless, the more he's gotten the state involved in all of these economic ventures, the more his economy has suffered. And we've seen that just this week with new data points coming out of China. The economy of China is suffering. If it gets involved in this mess with Russia, it will suffer further. There's a big article that's making the rounds where it's in the Wall Street Journal today, where they're talking about how China and Saudi Arabia would like to see oil priced in yuan, which is the Chinese currency. I have some comments on that for why, even if they did do that, which they won't, but even if they did, it's never going to work because the US dollar still reigns supreme. But before we get to that, just a quick note from one of our sponsors here, Key City Capital. You may have seen Charlie Dombeck on the program. He was on actually just on Friday with me talking about ways to allocate your portfolio in light of these turbulent times. And one of his suggestions was, of course, real estate. He runs a real estate investment fund where they're investing in Tennessee and in Florida and in Texas, states that are benefiting from this transition out of urban America and areas like New York or California, very high tax states, into places like Florida and Texas. And so it's a very interesting strategic combination of tax savings plus diversification in the portfolio that he's promising yields about an 8% return on its income each year. So it's worth checking out because it's a way to protect your wealth, to lower your tax liability, and it's generating this tax-free cash flow, which is kind of nice, right? In today's day and age. The other thing that's interesting about this particular investment that he is encouraging people to look into is that it's in real estate, which typically in an inflation environment is well hedged. So I encourage you to go to keycitycapital.com/Trish today. Again, keycitycapital.com/Trish. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see it there on your screen, and connect with Charlie. He can, I think, probably help a lot of people right now in terms of being able to invest in real estate and in a fund where you're protecting your income and you're growing your assets. So check that out. Kind of important these days, right, as we look at this crazy world. Anyway, back to this article that's making the rounds in the Wall Street Journal. I don't buy it. I think it's a lot of chatter. We've heard this before. Don't forget the Europeans at one point wanted to team up with the Saudis to price oil in euros, and now we've got the Saudis and China allegedly talking about pricing it in yuan. They've talked about things like this before. It's never actually happened, but even if it did, think about this for a second. Everything translates, right? Like, how does everything finally settle out? It settles out in dollars because everybody wants dollars. You think anybody wants yuan? I mean, knowing that the government in China can take it from you at any point in time. Don't forget what you've seen in recent years is anybody who has accumulated any kind of wealth at all in China, what do? They get it out of the country as fast as they can, and they're parking it here in the United States. Real estate, right? A lot of Chinese money that's coming to real estate in the United States, investment in the United States. They don't want to keep it in China. Nobody wants yuan. I'm sorry. Freedom matters. And even if the U.S. is willing to sanction around the world to help influence its economic policy, which I'm a big believer in doing, still, you want the dollars, right? The world runs on dollars, and I don't foresee that changing anytime soon. In fact, I would argue that in light of everything that's happening, dollars have become all the more important. The West has become all the more important. We did get word today that 3,000 U.S. troops are being sent to Australia. Why is that? Well, one would think to help protect our allegiance there, including with Taiwan, right? All of this has brought Taiwan into focus, which is why I'm so pleased to see companies like Intel making investments here in the United States of America. We need more of that. And yes, we need to have presence in places like Australia. I think it's a smart move by the administration to send 3,000 troops there because that sends a message. But Intel headquartering in Ohio also sends a message. $100 billion. That's how much the plant is going to be worth that they're putting into action there. Plus, you have Intel coming forward with a massive plan to invest in Germany as well. You see, the West is aligned. The West is aligned economically. The West is aligned in terms of its belief in the freedom of individuals. And this is what, the West is now up against. But I think when it comes down to it, ultimately China is a rational actor. They've got to look at what's happening right now with Ukraine and realize how irrational that is. Why? Because Putin is increasingly going to become like North Korea, North Korea's leader, who, by the way, hasn't done anything quite like this. But Russia is going to be in a position where it is completely disenfranchised from the rest of the world. Now, very interesting story as well out today. Antony Blinken, our Secretary of State, has said that he's actually willing to relieve the sanctions on Russia should Russia get with the program. In other words, if Russia were to drop all this tomorrow, we would say, okay, we can trade with you again. I don't know how I feel about that because I actually think there's no off-ramp at this point. I think that Vladimir Putin has shown what he is capable of. Anybody that supports Vladimir Putin has shown what they are capable of, and you cannot murder innocent civilians like that, little children, and expect to be able to walk away and have everything reinstituted, just as it was before. It may be a little bit of a bargaining technique, and they're trying to offer some kind of off-ramp for him, but there really is, let's be honest, no off-ramp. I also don't think he's willing to take it at any point. I mean, in other words, he's gotten so far into this situation now, he doesn't know where else to turn other than to just keep killing people. Think of how wrong that is. This is why it's important that we stand up here. It's important Europe stands up. I'll emphasize that I am a big believer in using sanctions to our advantage. But in order to make them work, everybody has to be on board, which means in the case of Europe right now, Europe has to be too. The idea that they are still purchasing, for cash, by the way, for cash, any natural gas from Russia is just truly awful and really speaks to how dependent they have become on Russia. The idea that they just a couple of weeks ago canceled the Nord Stream 2 project, I mean, it's unacceptable. And it really should be a wake-up call for all of us in terms of the need for our own energy independence. I'm going to get to that in just a moment, but first I just want to plug another one of our sponsors here. Great new sponsor that just came on board with the show. I know you care about your health. I care about my health. I take my vitamins every day, but I just learned that, I really shouldn't be taking the traditional vitamins. There's a much better way to do it. In fact, this is a proven way that's roughly 165% more absorption of these vitamins. And I want to show you here, if you're watching this podcast on YouTube or on Rumble or on Facebook, you can see these little packets from Healthy Cell that are immune boosters. So you get all your vitamins in here. You can just down the packets. They taste really good. You can mix it with water if you want, but the point is you don't have to take a pill with all the fillers and all the bad stuff that goes in there, not to mention the fact that it's not as absorbed as easily into your system. This is why this is good. For my most conservative viewers out there, you'll appreciate Dr. Peter McCullough actually takes this and likes it a ton. I want to encourage you to go to the website, healthycell.com. You can use code word Trish, my name, Trish, for 20% off, healthycell.com. Code word Trish. It's a really good, important way to get your vitamins. Your absorption rate is much, much higher. That has been clinically proven. So go ahead and give it a try. Again, code word Trish at healthycell.com. Moving back though to this issue of energy independence. I mean, this is so critical, right? Because we don't ever want to be in a situation where we're dependent on a country that we can't trust. It's partly why I'd like to see a normalization in terms of our relationship with Venezuela. I'd like us to be able to have, some kind of dialogue where we're getting along with the countries in our hemisphere as opposed to having them as foes. And I think there's an opportunity. There's a window actually there to be able to do that. So it's important. I commend the administration. I never commend the administration on anything, but I actually commend them on this one because they're trying to find, kind of a backdoor way of improving our relationship with a country that's so close to our Florida border, right? 3 hours from Miami and you're in Venezuela. We don't want the Russians hanging out there as they have threatened to do. So that's important. It's also important that we find a way to bring democracy and freedom to countries that are right here in our hemisphere, and by the way, have the added benefit of having all that oil. But most importantly, it's about energy independence for us. We need to make sure that we get all of our fracking capability and drilling capability up and running really quickly, along with renewables. But let's not kid ourselves, right? It's not like you can say, hey, let me go put 200 windmills on the coast of Maine and have them up and running by June. It just doesn't work that way. That needs to be an investment. It needs planning. It needs structure around it. And so we should begin that process. We should also begin the process of drilling on more land here in the U.S. But understand, there's been a real reluctance here from the energy industry, in part because remember where oil was? Down at $10 a barrel? They criticized, by the way, Donald Trump for buying oil at the time, saying, he's just trying to help his oil buddies out because it was $10 a barrel and he was filling up the SPR, the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, with it. Smart move, especially as we look at oil now nearing $100 a barrel. It's come down, I should point out, in recent days, in part because of China's economic problems. So that's good news, but I still think that with all the challenges going on, if we don't seek out our own sources of oil right here in the United States of America, long term we're really going to have a problem, and it matters for our national security. So there's stopgap measures that we should probably look at. I think Venezuela is one of them. More drilling, however, is needed in the United States, and I can't emphasize that enough. It really is national security, and you don't need one or the other. You need both. You need renewables and you need what we have, and that's just called being a realist. Europe needs their energy independence. We need our energy independence. That is the reality. And I think ultimately, if we do that, and I think this has been a wake-up call to make sure that we do, along with Europe making sure it has its own energy, along with us sending the right messages to China, which includes those 3,000 troops that just made way for Australia, then ultimately the West grows stronger in this environment. the previous administration talked a lot about America first, which in part is the West first too, right? Because you do need allies. You can't go completely alone. But we need our way of life over this Eastern way of life from China and from Russia that doesn't value individuals, that doesn't value democracy. We don't want that. So it's important that we exercise sort of our own power in this way. So I'm encouraged, although I'm hugely discouraged, you know that, like I'm just devastated by everything that's happened, but I'm encouraged at how the West is coming together. This is an important development. I think we're going to see more of it. And as awful as this all is, ultimately, Vladimir Putin is his worst enemy. He is his worst enemy because he is bringing all of us closer together in a way that will make Russia and China less relevant in the years to come. Just a reminder, make sure that you like this channel, that you subscribe to this channel, that you like the video on Rumble, on YouTube. I'm in all places. I'm also on Facebook at Real Trish Regan. And by the way, if you haven't joined the Locals platform, do make sure you do. trishregan.locals.com. It's a great way to support the show. It's a great way to be able to interact with me. We have a terrific group there. Wonderful folks over at trishregan.locals.com. And of course, my website, trishintel.com. So thank you so much for tuning in, and I will see you back here tomorrow.